Good evening, I'm David Kramer with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska. You can check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we have out for your area. You can also call our weather info line, 1-800-472-0391. Give me updates to the forecast through that means. Or you can email me at the bottom of the screen, david.kramer@noaa.gov. Taking a look now at the warnings and advisories that we do have out for our area. We'll start off in the Valdez area through Thompson Pass. We do still have a blizzard warning and high wind warning for the area. That is going to be valid till 6 p.m. this evening, so shouldn't be much longer. Things should start to taper down here pretty soon. And then both of those, the blizzard and the high wind warning, will both go away. Moving out to the southeastern part of the state, we'll start off up north by White Pass area. We did have a blizzard warning out for the area that is now diminished down to a wind chill advisory that's going to be in effect until 6 a.m. on Friday. Again, that is primarily for White Pass. And then down by the Juneau area, we do have a high wind warning in effect until 6 a.m. on Friday. Winds could get up to as high as 65 miles an hour, and that does include downtown Juneau and Douglas. Moving up to the north, staying out in the eastern portions of the area, we'll start out here by Eagle and down into the Delta Junction and Northway areas. We do have wind chill advisories that are in effect, and these are going to be in effect until from 9 p.m. this evening until noon on Friday. Wind chills could get down to as low as minus 55 degrees Fahrenheit. As we move up to the north in the northern part of the Brooks Range, we do have wind chill advisories in effect until 6 a.m. on Friday. That is primarily through the passes, and that's with wind chills getting down to as low as minus 55. Another wind chill advisory in the Kotzebue Sound area. Again, that's going to be in effect until 6 a.m. on Friday. Then all along the coastline from Wainwright down through Point Hope and then down into the Bering Strait coast as well. We do have winter weather advisories for blowing snow. Those are going to expire at different times here. Starting up north by Wainwright area, we do have that out until 6 a.m. on Friday. Then as we get down to the Chukchi Sea coastline, that's going to be in effect until noon on Friday. And then down by the Bering Strait coast, in effect until 6 a.m. on Friday. Again, those are all winter weather advisories for blowing snow. Visibilities could drop down to a half mile or less at times. Taking a look now at our satellite imagery, we can see low pressure system that's moving into the southern part of the Gulf of Alaska. You can see the front associated with that. We'll come back, watch this again. We do have the frontal system now in the central Aleutian Islands, pushing further to the east into the eastern Aleutian Islands, bringing cloud cover out through much of the eastern part of the Bering, northern part of the Bering as well, and starting to make its way into the southern or southwestern portions of mainland Alaska. Out over the mainland part of the state, not a lot of cloud cover there. We're seeing those colder temperatures with high pressure dominating the area, and that tighter gradient bringing some of those stronger winds through areas of the passes all along south central area and down into some areas of the Alaska Peninsula as well, and down into southeast Alaska. We also have a low pressure system out near the Panhandle area, bringing in some precipitation and cloud cover to portions of the Panhandle. So looking at the remainder of today's weather, there is that low pressure, some warmer air coming up with that as well. Southern portions of the Panhandle are transitioning over to rain, but as we get further to the north and some of the higher elevations, we are expecting that to be primarily snow. And the heaviest of that will be in the central and southern portions, lighter snow further to the north. High pressure out over the mainland part of the state, keeping a lot of the precipitation out of the area for south central Alaska, interior Alaska, and even much of the northern part of the state. We can see that tighter pressure gradient that's helping to aid in those stronger winds, especially through the Thompson Pass area and then down into the southeastern portions of the state. But up along the Arctic coastline, central locations around Utqiagvik are going to see some isolated snow showers, and we are going to see those blowing snow conditions along the northwest coastline through the Bering Strait coast. As we drop down to the west coast of the state, we do have some showers right along the coastline of the YK Delta, and then some snow for the St. Lawrence Island area as well. Our low pressure system that was out in the northern Pacific has moved into the southern portions of the Bering Sea, bringing colder air on the backside of that low, so some snow expected for the western Aleutian Islands, but warmer air with this front bringing in some rain to the central and eastern part of the Aleutian Islands. Still some snow out ahead of that for the Alaska Peninsula, and the Pribilofs are staying in snow as well for the remainder of the day. As we move into tonight, some of that rain can make it into the Pribilof Islands area as that low continues its progression to the east. And then on the backside, we are still going to see some colder air bringing in some snow to the eastern Aleutian Islands, with another system coming in from the west. Underneath the low, some of the warmer air still remains for the eastern Aleutian Islands, seeing some rain, and that rain line starting to push into the Alaska Peninsula, but most of the peninsula should stay in snow. Along the west coast, we're going to see more of the snow reaching the coastline up through the western parts of the Seward Peninsula and up along the Kotzebue Sound area. Still going to see some areas of blowing snow tonight along the northwest coastline down into the Bering Strait and into the Kotzebue area as well as we move into the overnight hours. Our high pressure system that was sitting right over the state is now pushed off to the east, but the ridging is still there, keeping the interior part of the state pretty dry, and that's going to extend south to south central Alaska as well. But we will still have our low pressure out by the Alaska Panhandle that is bringing in some snow, especially to the central portions of the Panhandle, with some areas further to the south. Still in some of the warmer air, a mix of rain and snow is expected there. As we move into Friday, a weak low in the eastern part of the Gulf, still bringing in some lighter showers to much of the Panhandle area, primarily snow, but there are some areas, especially as we get closer towards the Gulf, that we'll see a mix of rain and snow. As we move up into the south central part of the state, we have some snow in the northern part of the Gulf of Alaska, but should remain primarily off of or outside of the land areas. We still have some of that ridging from our high pressure that's now over northwestern Canada, extending out over the state, keeping the interior still pretty dry even on Friday, and dry up along the coast, the Arctic coastline as well. Down the west coast of the state, some lingering showers for the western Seward Peninsula, down into St. Lawrence Island and out into the northern part of the Bering Sea. And we'll still see snow throughout much of southwest Alaska from the YK Delta down into the Bristol Bay area, with another low that's formed on the old boundary moving out towards Kodiak Island, bringing in some snow to southern portions of Kodiak Island. To the western side of these lows, still a little bit of warmer air lingering for the eastern Aleutians and some places of the Alaska Peninsula, bringing some rain to the area. And that next system we saw on Thursday making it to the western Aleutians on Friday, bringing some snow to the western Aleutians, warmer air for the central Aleutians, starting to bring some rain into those locations. As we look into Saturday, that system pushes further into the Bering Sea, bringing that rain line well through the central Aleutians, through the eastern Aleutians, and into the Alaska Peninsula. But on the backside of that system, still drawing in some of that colder air, keeping snow for the western Aleutian Islands. Low pressure out over the southwestern part of the state, keeping snow throughout much of the Bristol Bay, YK Delta areas, extending up into the central parts of the interior. Finally going to see some snow return to the interior portions of the state on Saturday as our high pressure has finally moved off enough. And then we do have some snow around the Kotzebue Sound area down through the Norton Sound as well. Arctic coastline should still stay dry on Saturday, but we will have snow coming back to south central Alaska, including the Kenai Peninsula, all along the North Gulf Coast into northern portions of the Panhandle to include Yakutat as well. Taking a look at our temperatures now, starting off in the Panhandle for Friday morning, we are in the teens for northern locations and right around 30 degrees in the south. As we move along the Gulf coastline, in the single digits positive numbers, but as we move to interior locations in south central, going to get into the single digits below zero, with Glen Allen staying colder there at minus 28 expected low Friday morning. In the interior, minus 30s, and then as we get out to the east, getting closer to minus 40, with Fort Yukon a little bit colder there, minus 41. Minus 20s along much of the Arctic coastline, warmer as we get further to the west, single digits below zero along the west coast. Kotzebue staying a little bit colder there, minus 12. Galena at minus 27. Single positive digits for the YK Delta until we get up by Antioch, minus 9 expected there, but staying below zero for areas around Bristol Bay. Then as we drop into the Alaska Peninsula, right around 30 degrees warmer as we get further off into the Aleutians, in the upper 30s expected for lows. Then as we look at our highs for Friday afternoon, up to around 40 degrees, 32 for St. Paul for that expected high, dropping down into the 20s for those highs for the Bristol Bay area, single digits to the lower teens for much of the YK Delta area, and that's going to extend up through the Seward Peninsula as well. Single digits along the Arctic coastline becoming into the negatives as we move further off to the east. Staying just below zero for northern portions of the interior, southern portions right around zero, and in the teens for south central Alaska. Along the North Gulf Coast, right around 30 degrees is expected. That's going to continue into the Panhandle, but warmer as we get to those southern locations, with Ketchikan getting up to 39 degrees. For our Saturday morning lows, dropping into the mid-20s, southern portions of the Panhandle into the teens for northern locations, extending along the North Gulf Coast as well. Single digits for much of the southern portions of south central Alaska, getting below zero as we get further to the north. Negative teens for much of the interior, into the negative 20s for areas around the upper Yukon Valley, and then in the minus 20s along the Arctic coastline, minus teens as we get to those western locations of the Arctic coast, and then single digits all along the west coast of the state into the 30s as we get into the Aleutian Islands. Then our Saturday afternoon highs back into the 40s for the Aleutians, into the 20s for southwest Alaska. Much colder for the interior, getting down into or just below or staying below zero for those highs. Single digits for southern portions of the interior, into the 20s for south central Alaska.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
I'm meteorologist Amanda Bowen with your flying weather. For Friday morning, we'll see IFR conditions along much of the immediate west coast and over the waters just adjacent, including down into the southern Bering Sea and stretching into the southern Alaska Peninsula. Marginal conditions for the rest of the Aleutians as well as the entirety of the Alaska Panhandle on Friday morning. Friday afternoon, some improvement for the southern Alaska Panhandle to VFR conditions, with marginal continuing for the northern Panhandle as well as for the immediate south central coast. IFR conditions from about Bristol Bay down into the southern Alaska Peninsula, as well as coming into the western portions of the Aleutians with our next low pressure system. For Saturday morning, we see those IFR conditions spreading to the central Aleutians as that low pressure system moves in. IFR also from the north side of the Alaska Peninsula stretching northward to about the Yukon River and over about St. Lawrence Island back into the north side of Norton Sound. For the Panhandle, still marginal conditions from the northern Panhandle through south central, VFR for the southern Panhandle on Saturday morning. For Saturday afternoon, IFR conditions spreading from about Bristol Bay into south central and north to almost the Brooks Range, as well as IFR conditions associated with that next low pressure system, both in front of it in the Bering Sea and behind it for the western Aleutians. Looking at your pass forecast for Friday, lots of VFR flying weather out there at the passes. So Anaktuvik and Adigan passes VFR, Maryland Lake Clark VFR, as well as rainy and windy passes VFR on Friday. Isabel and Mentasta VFR and Tanita VFR on Friday. Portage VFR, but we will see some MVFR ceilings on the east entrance of Portage Pass Friday afternoon. And then MVFR all day at White and Chilkoot on Friday. Freezing levels, surface freezing levels stretching from the southern Alaska Peninsula into the northern Gulf and the immediate coast of the Alaska Panhandle, with warmer air moving up just to the south side of the central Aleutians. Taking a look at icing forecast for Friday, quite a lot of isolated moderate icing above about 7,000 feet for the central Aleutians and the southern portion of the Alaska Peninsula, above about 4,000 feet for the northern Alaska Peninsula as well as Kodiak Island, and even lower above about 3,000 feet for much of the rest of the west coast of the state. For the Panhandle, a lot of isolated moderate from about 3,000 to 8,000 feet. Taking a look at the jet stream, we've got about 150 knots over the western Aleutians, 120 to 130 knots over the central Aleutians and the southern portion of the Alaska Peninsula, 70 to 75 knots over the north slope into the Canadian border, about 60 knots off of the northern portions of the Panhandle, and then about 120 knots out of the south coming into the Pacific Northwest of the CONUS. For 9,000 foot winds, we have our low pressure system that's going to be moving in, but it's off the map to the west at this point. So 25 to 30 knot winds out of the south on the east side of that low, which we can't quite see yet on the map. 30 to 35 knots over the Aleutians, but 60 knots just south of those central Aleutians. Pretty light winds over much of the mainland with 10 to maybe as high as 20 knots over the west side, and only about 10 to 15 knots over the Panhandle for Friday. At 3,000 feet, light winds again across most of the interior, 5 to 10 knots, about 20 to 30 knots over the southern Alaska Peninsula and the eastern and central Aleutians, 35 knots increasing to about 45 knots on the south side of the western Aleutians, and about 65 knots if you go well south of the Aleutians. For the Panhandle, light winds still only about 5 to 10 knots for the Panhandle. Taking a look at turbulence, we have considerable moderate turbulence stretching all the way from the southern portions of the Alaska Peninsula, just a spot there that's going to be below about 4,000 feet. Also considerable moderate for the central Aleutians, below about 4,000 feet, as that next low pressure system starts to move in and bring a front in. We saw that in the public segment. We'll talk about it again in the marine segment. And then also considerable moderate for the western Aleutians, surrounded by some isolated moderate. All of this going to be below about 4,000 feet. Not much in the way of icing for the Alaska Panhandle on Friday. Stay tuned for an educational segment, and then we'll get to Marines.
Mercury is in retrograde, fam, and everything is terrible. Or is it? Mercury retrograde means the planet appears to stop and change direction. Some think it's a harbinger of bad luck, but it's just an optical illusion of orbital mechanics. No big deal, it's not even really happening. Because Mercury orbits the sun every 88 Earth days, sometimes it's on the same side of the sun as we are, and other times it's not. This makes it look like the planet reverses its orbit. If you've been watching Mercury over the last couple of weeks, it's appeared to rise above the horizon and then stop and then head back down again. If you pass a car on the highway, it appears to move towards you and then move away, but it's never actually going backward. This is the same optical illusion. Apparent retrograde actually happens with all the planets. Just remind yourself it is totally normal and it won't affect you at all while you keep looking up.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining me once again is Cindy Preller. She is the Tsunami Program Manager for the National Weather Service in Alaska region. Thanks for joining us again, Cindy.
Thank you, Dave.
We're talking about tsunami awareness and safety here in Alaska especially, and one of the things that has been one of your main focuses is the Tsunami Ready program. What is that, and how do Alaskans find out more?
Awesome. Yes, Tsunami Ready is a National Weather Service hosted program in partnership with Storm Ready.
Okay.
And it is a program that we conduct with our partners in the state, but it's mostly community driven. So if a community wants to become Tsunami Ready, well, the first thing they need to do is get a hold of me or their local WCM at a weather forecast office or their tsunami team at the state level.
So, and this is something that's a NOAA grant, so there's money available to help encourage the preparedness at the local level there in the city or the village.
Yeah.
What are some of the places that have done this already?
Oh, our oldest Tsunami Ready city is Seward,
Good.
you know, but also Sitka, Homer, Valdez are the, you know, the main players, but we've got several Tsunami Ready communities that I'm very proud of. It takes several years to accomplish this. And so a few of the things that they do is the tsunami risk will be assessed by someone like me or another scientist will help find out, you know, really what their probability is. We'll create an inundation map, an evacuation map. They'll have a mitigation plan. We will set up some partnerships with the schools, make an evacuation shelter, and then they need to practice. But it is the city that owns the program, really. It's up to them. And many cities would like to have sirens, and so we help them get those. And, you know, and they practice. They have to practice.
Sure. So let's say I'm driving into a place like Seward that's tsunami ready. What are some of the things I should look for as maybe a visitor so I know maybe where I need to go or can be more aware of my tsunami risk?
Absolutely. The Tsunami Ready signage is really blatant. It's this, you know, blue and white curling wave sign, and there's different shapes of signs that'll show you if you are in the hazard zone or where the evacuation routes are and when you're out of shelter.
Okay. So this is a multi-step process that helps the residents be more aware of their own risk, but then also prepare for when that risk arrives.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, many communities sound their sirens daily, some sound them weekly, you know, to make sure everybody knows what they mean. And there's often drills. We have an annual drill once a year. We have Tsunami Awareness Preparedness Week, and that's a good time for each community to do some exercising.
Okay. And is this a program that is unique to Alaska?
Absolutely not. It's national.
Okay.
And all over the country, you'll have the same signage, so it's consistent.
Good. So if I'm taking the kids to California, I should be able to see something familiar.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And, you know, some communities hesitate because they think it'll discourage tourism. And so I would like to tell those communities that what they're actually doing is they're encouraging responsibility.
Sure.
The tsunami is going to happen,
Right.
and it's going to hit every coastline. So, you know, it's not about when, it'll be any time. So the fact that they're showing tourists that they are making steps to be prepared for this, I think would encourage people to want to stay there.
Right, and that would be no different than, say, you or I visiting the Midwest, where we know there's going to be really bad thunderstorms and maybe there's a risk for tornadoes. We're aware of that risk when we go there.
Absolutely. If I see a sign for a tornado shelter, I'm going to remember that.
Right. Okay. All right. So we're just doing a better job of being more prepared with something that's bound to happen again.
I hope so.
Okay. Very good. Where can people go again to learn more about the Tsunami Ready program here in Alaska?
Well, one, there is a Tsunami Ready website. So, you know, just Tsunami Ready,
Google
and that'll
Tsunami
get you
Ready.
there.
Okay.
And then probably the best person for people to contact is their warning coordination meteorologist at their local weather forecast office, which is Anchorage or Juneau, most likely.
Okay. All right. So most of the folks along the Bering Sea coast, again, are not at a huge risk for tsunamis at this
No,
point.
they don't need to worry about it.
Okay,
Thank
very
you.
good. But always learning to be prepared no matter where you are in Alaska, no matter what the risk, always a good step. And tsunami is a major player in that, as we well know from events like 1964.
Alaskans are resilient. I really believe in them.
Very good, very good. Well, Cindy, thank you so much for joining us again. And please make an effort to learn more about the Tsunami Ready program in your village and town if you haven't already. We'll be back with Cindy again next time to talk more about the Tsunami Warning Center in Palmer, Alaska. We actually have a group of geologists working for the National Weather Service. So scratch your head on that one and we'll join you next time. See you next time on Alaska Weather Packs.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Let's take a look at the sea ice edge to start off the marine segment. It looks like things are pretty similar to what we saw yesterday, with that less than 80% concentration still surrounding the island of St. Paul. There's been a little bit of movement north in the sea ice edge to the west of St. Paul due to some southerly winds. But over the next couple of days, we expect to see not a whole lot in the way of change, as winds will be coming from different directions at different times and pushing the sea ice just a little bit in any direction, only about 20 to 30 nautical miles. So not a lot of change coming up over the next couple of days for the sea ice edge. Looking at winds and seas for the southeast, for Friday, looking at winds ranging from 15 to about 30 knots over the Gulf, generally out of the east and southeast. For the inside waters, a little bit higher, 30 to 35 knots for those northern inside waters out of the north, about 10 knots for the southern inside waters. Seas in that 6 to 9 foot range over the Gulf. For Saturday, winds and seas both coming down. So over the Gulf, 10 to 15 knots of wind and 10 to 20 knots over the inside waters. Seas dropping to just 5 to 6 feet. For South Central, we see winds on Friday out of the east and northeast in the 15 to 25 knot range. Seas generally 5 to 7 feet for Friday. And then as we look into Saturday, winds and seas both coming down. So winds just 10 to 15 knots. Seas 3 to 4 feet, 2 feet in Prince William Sound. For the Alaska Peninsula area on Friday, we'll see winds 15 to 25 knots and seas in that 5 to about 13 foot range, about 6 feet on the north side of the peninsula and about 13 feet further south on the south side. Some changes into Saturday, so winds 10 to 20 knots coming down a little bit and generally out of the southwest. Seas also coming down a bit, 8 to 10 feet, still about 6 feet on the north side of the peninsula. For the Aleutians, central Aleutians, pretty consistent with 30 knots out of the west on Friday. Seas ranging from about 14 to 17 feet on the south side, 9 to 11 feet on the north side of the chain. And then for the western Aleutians, 25 to 35 knot winds out of the east and southeast. Seas about 10 to 14 feet. Again, some changes into Saturday. Winds more consistently across the Aleutian chain out of the southwest, 20 to 30 knots. Seas coming down a bit as well, ranging from about 8 feet on the north side to 11 feet on the south side, about 13 feet for the western Aleutians. Taking a look at the west coast, we see winds ranging from about 15 feet 15 knots up in Norton Sound to about 25 knots off the YK Delta coast. Those are going to be out of the east with 10 knots down by the Provo Alps out of the north. Seas from 8 to about 9 feet south of that sea edge. And then looking into Saturday, winds still generally out of the north and northeast, even lower a little bit on Saturday. So 5 knots up in Norton Sound to about 15 to 25 knots further south. Seas still around 5 to 6 feet south of that sea ice edge. For the Arctic coast, winds generally out of the south on Friday, 15 knots along the north slope to about 20 knots along the west coast. And of course, all ice cover still in this area. And then winds coming down even a little bit more on Saturday, so just 5 knots out of the west for the north slope and about 10 knots for the west coast, 15 knots out of the north through the Bering Strait. Taking a look at our weather that we're expecting for tonight, a recap. We've got low pressure just north of the central Aleutians with an occluded front that's going to be moving up into the Alaska Peninsula, spreading snow initially and then possibly some rain. And then low pressure also just off the Panhandle. So that's going to be moving in and dissipating over the next day or so, bringing some snow to the higher terrain and mixed precipitation to the lower terrain, followed probably by some rain. High pressure in control for most of the mainland with not even a cloud in sight for a lot of areas, plenty of sun to see through the day today and again even into tomorrow somewhat, with high pressure centered over Western Canada and also over Eastern Russia. Thanks so much for watching Alaska TV Weather. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.